Howdy my totally always tubular gamers, and we're back with, you guessed it, another ranking video. Today we're talking Nicktoons, but we're not just talking any kind of Nicktoons. We're not talking about the shows or the movies or the Timmy Jimmy Power Hour. We are talking about Nicktoons Racing games. Now Nicktoons, I don't think Nicktoons needs an introduction here. Nickelodeon does not need an introduction, and there's tons upon tons of Nickelodeon video games and other Nicktoons games. I mean, there's like 50 SpongeBob games alone. But what I have noticed is that there's a fair amount of Nicktoons racing games that involve all of the Nicktoons, or at least a ton of the Nicktoons, just going at it in cars, karts, bikes, some kind of vehicle. Most of these are decently similar to Mario Kart, but they all have their own similarities, and I mean, there's always going to be a novelty of seeing your favorite Nickelodeon characters racing against each other, and so I thought, you know, there's actually a decent amount of these games, and there's even some new ones. So let's talk about Nicktoons racing games. Let's rank them all worst from best, see how they all stack up against each other. We're going to be ranking these games based on their quality, how well is the balancing, how's the controls, how much fun are these games, have they aged well, all that good stuff. You know how these lists go. I won't be talking about the browser or arcade game, as I have actually just no experience with those games, and so yeah, it's not here. I actually have some fond memories with a couple of these games, and I even went out and got all the new Nickelodeon kart racing games just to see how they all stack up against each other. And so yeah, let's just get right into it. Let me know your favorite Nickelodeon game down below, or any lists you want to see, or your favorite racing games. Like, share, comment, sub. We got a Patreon going on as well now that I've been laid off, and so yeah. Per usual, all these games are getting a little review, and so what do I think is the weakest of the Nickelodeon racing games? And so here we have Nicktoons Racing, but not the PS1 or Windows version, but the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy Advance version. Yes, we have the handheld versions of Nicktoons Racing. Now these two versions, outside of the perspective, they're not that different from each other, and I'd say they're actually rather similar in their quality, i.e. not very good. Now to start with the Game Boy Color version, you know, this already doesn't sound like a great idea. Racing game on the GBC, yeah, I don't know how well that's going to go, and this game is a prime example of why there probably shouldn't be any racing games on the Game Boy Color. The controls are pretty weird, you know, it's played from a top-down perspective, and it's really nothing special. The controls, like, not only are they weird, but they're just really clunky and stiff and incredibly imprecise. I mean, I don't know what I was expecting from a Game Boy Color game. But the controls do not do it for me, and then you have the actual racing and the courses. The courses are absolutely nothing special. It is very generic, very vanilla. There's nothing exciting really going on here, and the actual racing itself, I mean, it's just not very exciting. I mean, look at it. Is this something you'd really want to play nowadays? Like, even for the time, yeah, I wouldn't want to play this. Like, this game came out in 2000. Do you know how many other good licensed racing games there were in the year 2000 or before? There was a lot, and this is not one that I would want to play. The Game Boy Advance version, you know, it is a little better. It controls a little better. The perspective's better, and the courses are a tad better, and it is more exciting. I will give it that. I'd rather play the Game Boy Advance game over the Game Boy Color game, but I still really would rather not play either of these games. They not only don't control all that well, but they just aren't very exciting. They don't really do anything to distinguish themselves from any other generic kart race, so the items don't really have a large effect. Yeah, you have some Nickelodeon characters here, but I'm not going to act like it was an amazing roster even for 2000. I can confidently say I'd really rather play like any other racing game on the Game Boy Advance. I mean, Crash Nitro Kart, Mario Kart Super Circuit, shit, even like Simpsons Road Rage is better than this game. I mean, it's not like awful. The Game Boy Color version's pretty bad. The Game Boy Advance version, it's not awful, but I just really can't recommend anyone try either of these two games, even if you do love old Nickelodeon games. And so here we have Nicktoons Winners Cup Racing releasing for the PC in 2006. Now, I actually did get this game like way back when I was a kid. I actually found it in the clearance area of a Home Depot. I could not make this up. It really was at the Home Depot. And what is this game, you'll probably ask? Well, it is what Nickelodeon fans have really always wanted. It's finally that hardcore racing sim that we've waited forever for. Okay, it's not that. It is the definition of budget shovelware, just kind of garbage that was thrown out on the PC in the 2000s that have some of our Nickelodeon characters here. It is a racing game, I think. Yes, I can confirm still there is racing in this game. There are some other game modes here that are not as traditional with their racing. Who are you going to play as in this game? Well, you have a really interesting roster, as there's SpongeBob, Jimmy, Timmy, and Danny Phantom and their respective villains, and that's it. A bunch of classic characters like Patrick are not here. Or that really obscure Jimmy Neutron character known as Sheen is not here. I do not know why the roster just kind of sucks. As a kid, I was always really confused by this as well. Now, when it comes to the driving, it is quite abysmal. It controls, it's just awful when it comes to its controls, actually. Like, there's really just nothing good to say here when it comes to the controls. It feels really imprecise, really slow. It feels like the cars are consistently underwater. It just does not have a nice feel to it, and I can't believe even as a kid I slightly enjoyed this, because this controls horribly. And when it comes to the gameplay, the racing and the tracks, it actually reminds me a lot of South Park Rally, and you do not ever want to be compared to South Park Rally. Like, South Park Rally is a little bit of a guilty pleasure of mine, but I know it's shit. I know it absolutely sucks, and this game, it actually plays kind of similar to South Park Rally with how the tracks are laid out, where it's just kind of like they designed this kind of like open area and then made tracks around that open area versus just developing race tracks. So the layout, the track design, and all of the navigation just feels really disjointed. There's this ugly arrow all over the ground. There's a bunch of arrows all over the ground just telling you where to go, and it's just not a satisfying experience, like, at all. And then there's like these other challenges with some other modes, and you know what? It's bad. It's bad. It's not fun. It's not satisfying. The game feels incredibly slow and underwhelming, and it really feels like a browser game that got put on a disc. That's really the best way to describe this game. It's incredibly budget. It doesn't really have much going for it. It does have the original voice actors, so there you go, but incredibly poor presentation, even for '06, and it just really, it doesn't have any merit to it in modern day. It doesn't even work on modern computers. I tried it not that long ago because, of course, I've still got my copy from Home Depot. That shit's gold. But what's the saying? One man's gold is another man's trash, or some shit like that. I don't know. This game is trash. That's what I'm trying to say. The game is trash. It's not worth playing, and just skip it. And here we have Nicktoons Racing, but this time we're looking at the console and PC version. Now, I also have some fond memories with this one, and you know, coming back all these years later, this is a decent little racing game for the PS1 that won't wow you, and it doesn't do anything exceptional, but what you have here is a fun little game. The game is a fairly standard kart racer with various Nickelodeon characters and themed tracks. You know, the racing itself, it isn't the furthest from Mario Kart, I'll be the first to say it. It does have items, it does have like kind of a drift mechanic, and not really, you just kind of turn really hard, but it does play fairly similar to Mario Kart. The items clearly are nothing special, you know, they kind of are Nickelodeon themed, but they don't have the greatest impact on the racing itself. I mean, if you're decent enough at the driving, you'll be just fine here. The items certainly help. Now, when it comes to the driving, I'm not going to say it handles like exceptionally well. It doesn't feel amazing. It doesn't feel anywhere near as nice as, say, Mario Kart 64 or Diddy Kong Racing, but it's okay. It can feel a little sluggish. The turning can feel a little slow. In fact, the driving itself can feel quite slow. It's probably one of my bigger issues with this game is that the pacing is a little slow and you don't really have a great sense of speed, but it controls okay. I've certainly seen a lot better though from other licensed racing games at the time, like the Looney Tunes Racing game, which I think is much better than this game. But something you won't have in the Looney Tunes Racing game is Nickelodeon characters. I mean, that's one of the biggest parts of this game is the Nickelodeon characters racing each other. How is the roster here? You know, for early Nick, I think it's pretty decent. We've got Rugrats, Ren and Stimpy, Real Monsters, Hey Arnold, Angry Beavers, which is really an obscure one. I don't think Angry Beavers has been in another Nickelodeon game, period. Cat Dog, Wild Thornberries, which is cool. We've got a couple SpongeBob characters here as well. And this was back when SpongeBob was like new, so this is cool to see. I think the roster, it's decent enough. It's better than the Game Boy Color and Advance versions. Something else that's a lot better is the track design. It's quite a bit more exciting here, and it's just a lot more fun to go through these courses. There's obviously some fan service here, and there's nothing, you know, that's all that well designed or I'm like, wow, that was a really memorable or great track, but it's decent here. The presentation obviously is very budget. No, it didn't look great, especially for 2001, but I mean, it's got a certain charm to it, I won't lie. This game, it's got some fun to it, it's got some issues, you know, the sense of speed isn't great, it doesn't have a ton of content, and it does get kind of old fast, and it isn't the most rewarding experience, but I mean, I didn't question my time when I was with it. It's not like it's all that long. I certainly didn't want it to end immediately like some of the other games here, so I mean, that's always a big plus. I'd rather play this than mine cryptocurrency for my 350 or whatever. Like, you could do worse. I mean, you could do a lot better, but you could certainly do worse. I mean, if you love old Nickelodeon, you love old racing games, and you haven't tried this one, maybe it's worth trying. It's not long at all, and so yeah, maybe it would be worth trying. And so here we have the first Nickelodeon kart racers releasing in 2018 for all the consoles at the time. It was developed by Bam-Tang Games and published by Game Mill. So this was the first Nick racing game in like 10 years, and so it is a little bit of a step up compared to those older Nickelodeon racing games, but is it all that much better than the older titles? Well, a little bit. Look, maybe I've got a soft spot or I'm being too nice to these games, but I think what we have here is a decent little racing game that is not exceptional. It's not going to make you drop Mario Kart, it's not going to make you drop CTR or even some other licensed racing games, but this first Nickelodeon kart racers, you know, they established a decent formula that they would very much build on in later games. When it comes to the roster, I won't lie to you, it's not great. There's SpongeBob, there's TMNT, Rugrats, and Hey Arnold, and that's it. There's a couple characters from each one, and that's the whole roster. This is something that would greatly be expanded on in other kart racing games because, yeah, that's kind of weak. Like, this was 2018, this was not during a time where there wasn't exactly a ton of iconic Nickelodeon characters. I just think it's kind of weak. I mean, you know, it's cool TMNT's there, but I would have expected more. And also some voice acting. It's a little strange there's like no voice acting here. When it comes to the presentation, you know, it looks very budget, it feels very budget, it is very budget, and so I'm not going to roast it too hard. It's not excellent, it doesn't look great, it doesn't sound great. But, you know, it's okay. It's a step above indie games, I'll give it that at least. Now, when it comes to the driving, it's okay. It's just okay, you know, it takes a little bit of time to get used to. It does feel a bit stiff and a bit clunky. It does not feel anywhere near as nice as other racing games that came out around the time, like CTR. But you very much can come to grips with it. It feels a lot more casual than, say, you know, Mario Kart or most kart racing games. It is a very casual feeling driving game, and it could control worse. I can say that. It could control worse. At least the game does have a decent sense of speed. It actually does feel like you go kind of fast at some points. The characters actually kind of feel different from each other, which is a positive since there isn't a ton of characters. They all have their own vehicles, which is something the later games would drop. Something else that the later games would improve on is the track design. The track design in this game, like, is okay. It's just okay. It doesn't do anything special. There's really nothing all that memorable or anything above even just or decent. But I wouldn't say any of the tracks are bad. In fact, that's really kind of how I would describe Nickelodeon kart racers in general. Like, it's not good, but it's not bad either. It's just kind of in the middle. It does a few things that are a bit mediocre, and it does a few things that are okay. It doesn't fall into like licensed garbage that nobody should ever play, but it doesn't go into like, oh, this is a hidden gem or some underrated kart racer you've never heard of. Like, it's okay at best. I wasn't expecting greatness. I wasn't even expecting the game to be average at best, but what we have here is a very average standard racing game that would be improved on in later games. And so should you play this first one? No, I don't think this first one is worth playing, but it's good to see where this kart racer series got its start and how much they've actually improved on the series. And so here we have Nickelodeon Kart Racers 2 Grand Prix releasing in 2020. Now this game just kind of looks at the first one and improves it in just about every single area to be a much better game all around. Let's start with the biggest improvement. This game has a lot more content. The original game, you know, it didn't have a lot of tracks, it didn't have a lot of characters, it didn't have online multiplayer, it just didn't have a lot of content. This game, it absolutely has a lot of content with 28 tracks and 30 characters. And when it comes to the character roster, it's actually kind of fire. We have all the characters returning from the first game, all the SpongeBob, TMNT, Hey Arnold, and Rugrats characters, but now we have the Loud House, we have JoJo Siwa, we have Rocco, Invader Zim, Ren and Stimpy, Avatar, Korra, CatDog, and Danny Phantom. Like I said, it's actually a decent selection of characters. There's no voice acting still, which is just really strange, but at least we have a lot more of these recognizable characters, so that is a big plus. I will say immediately also the tracks are just a lot better. There's a couple tracks returning from the first game, and it's kind of obvious which ones they are because they're just not as well designed. Like, they were okay at best, but the new tracks here, yeah, they're actually decent. I wouldn't say there's any bad ones, and it's fun to go through most of them, and there's a decent amount of fan service here. When it comes to the handling and the driving and all of that, it's a little better here. There's more items, and the items are definitely more useful than the first games, but the actual driving itself, yeah, it's okay. The cars handle decently. You know, it does take a little bit of time to get used to it because it is so loose feeling. It still does feel casual. You can still go through all these tracks without drifting like at all, but I definitely would recommend drifting. It feels a bit casual, but you know, it's okay. It's okay. It's a marginal improvement on the first games. It does not feel as sluggish or just kind of clunky as the first games. And then when it comes to all the content we have, there is the local racing, there's like the Grand Prix, there's an actual challenge mode here with a bunch of different challenges to do. There's actually some interesting challenges here, but there is online multiplayer. The first game, no online. This game does have online, which is cool to see for such a clearly budget game. But I certainly never found anybody playing this game online, so that's unfortunate. But, it's cool to say the game has online. Look, this game, it isn't going to wow you. It's not an amazing kart racer, but it's a fun little time with a bunch of your favorite characters. The presentation, it's a bit better than the first game as well. It doesn't look like they're just reusing assets. I think when this game came out, most people were just surprised that a second game even came out. But you know what we have here? It's decent. It's a decent little racer that is certainly better than the first kart racer and a big step in the right direction. And here we have Nickelodeon Kart Racers 3 Slime Speedway releasing in 2022, and I believe this is the best Nickelodeon racing game. This game really looks at the first two kart racers and just improves them in so many areas to be actually a pretty good racing game. Is it going to stand up to Mario Kart 8, and are people going to be flocking from it to play this game? Absolutely not, but what you have here is actually a good racing game with a bunch of Nickelodeon characters and fan service that I think most people can enjoy. Obviously, when it comes to the budget, when it comes to the presentation, it's not amazing for 2022. It's not going to wow you. The art style does look a little weird and some characters just look off thanks to it, but it looks okay. Everyone looks okay for the most part. You can at least tell who everyone is. But the biggest improvement to the presentation is voice acting. This game actually is voice acting. The first two games did not, and it's good to hear voice acting here. It's good to hear a bunch of my favorite characters in any media talking. And they do talk a lot and it can get kind of annoying, but I'd rather have him being annoying than what we had in the first two games, which was just silence. But what good is voice acting if we don't have good characters for it? This game has over 40 characters, making it the biggest roster of like any Nickelodeon game, and it's great. It's actually just really good with a bunch of Rugrats characters, Ren and Stimpy he being here, Rocco's here, Real Monsters is here, Hey Arnold, Cat Dog, bunch of SpongeBob characters, Invader Zim, Jimmy Neutron, My Life as a Teenage Robot, Danny Phantom, Avatar, Korra, Loudhouse, TMNT, Garfield, oh hell yeah, even those weird new SpongeBob shows, and JoJo Siwa returning. But there's more choices to make before a race than just choosing your character. You get to choose from a bunch of different karts and cars here. You get to customize it just like Mario Kart 8. It really is just like Mario Kart 8 in terms of customization with different stats, bonuses, etc. And you have the pit crew characters. You actually get to choose 3 different characters to go alongside you that give you, passive abilities or buffs or items. And when it comes to the pit crew characters, there is a ton here. There's like 90 crew members, and these are where all the characters that aren't playable are hiding. Characters like Mr. Krabs and Plankton, or all the Loudhouse family, or Jimmy's dad, like the most important one. And it's cool to just see how many different Nickelodeon characters they really could cram into this game that aren't Fairly Odd Parents, because it's clear something's going on with Fairly Odd Parents. They're not in any of these games. And then we have all of the tracks. This game actually has a ton of tracks. There's a bunch of returning ones from the first 2 games, but there is a ton of tracks here, and I think these are the best tracks of the whole series. These are actually pretty decent, they're fun to go through, and the biggest thing, there's a ton of fan service. If you like these shows, oh, there's so much good representation here. It's really great, actually, especially for SpongeBob fans. There's a bunch of fan service to old SpongeBob, and if you love Nickelodeon cartoons, I really just think the game is worth playing just based off the fan service alone. So good selection of tracks, characters, fan service, but then we have the actual driving. It's a small improvement on the second game. Look, it doesn't feel amazing. It can feel a little awkward. It still is pretty casual. You don't even have to drift for most of these turns, but it could be a hell of a lot worse. It's not awful. It's not bad. It's not terrible. It's not amazing. It doesn't feel great. It's not super satisfying, but it's okay. The game has a good sense of speed to it as well. The best of the 3 kart racer games. And then a bunch of the items returned from the first 2 games. There's a number of new ones here. The items do actually help for the most part. I think it is a decent balance. It's not, amazing. There are kind of too many items, it feels at times, and I'm not sure what some stuff does, but it's decent enough. When it comes to the actual moment-to-moment racing, I think it's an enjoyable enjoyable enough time. The game actually does have a decent challenge thanks to the crazy rubber banding AI, so at least it's engaging. I mean, rubber banding and kart racing just kind of go together, so I just really expect it at this point in time. But I mean, the game at least put up a decent challenge. There's a bunch of challenges here actually. Well, on the subject of challenges, yeah, there's actual challenges where you get different objectives. You get a character chosen for you, a car chosen for you. And there's some good variety here, and there's, as usual, more fan service. There's also, you know, the usual Grand Prix. There's actually a bunch of Grand Prix cups to go through in different difficulty modes. There's online multiplayer. There's actually people still playing this game online, which is nice. And yeah, there's actually a good amount of content in this game. I spent a lot more time with this game than either of the other kart racers combined, because this game, it just has a lot more content. There is a hell of a lot to unlock in this game. There's actually a ton of unlockables. You know, you don't get a bunch of currency when you finish events or races, and so the game does feel a bit grindy, but I mean, there's a ton of content to unlock here. They clearly want to keep you hooked for a long time with this one, and like I said, I actually put a decent amount of time into this one. I enjoyed it, and out of all the Nick kart racers, this is the one that's worth playing. If I could recommend one Nickelodeon kart racer over them all, it's the latest one, Nickelodeon Kart Racers 3. It's pretty decent, it's still fun, it's really cheap immediately. I mean, it's still a budget, just kind of licensed kids game for the most part, but I think it's rather cool to see how much this series improved. You know, it's actually taken pretty large strides from that original Kart Racers, which wasn't like bad, but this game is actually good. I can actually recommend it and say yes, it's a good game that is actually worth playing, especially if you like driving or kart racers. And with that, I'm happy to end the video on a good note. You know, Nickelodeon Kart Racers, it's not all just licensed shovelware trash. I'm happy that there are some decent games here, and I've actually had a fun time. So let me know down below what your favorite of these games are, or what you would like to see ranked. See y'all later. Bye bye now.